So I thought of a little something. Because I really like doing brews, I thought I could challenge myself a little bit. And I came up with the official Shipwrecks test. Shipwrecks because the first brew is gonna be about Shipwreck Sifters. And the idea here is that we try to make a brew work as hard as possible, or it's gonna fail miserably and gonna crash and gonna sink, well, like a shipwreck. That's the idea. And the challenge goes as following. We will take a brew and we will try getting 3 wins in a tournament practice. We will try getting 5 wins in a row in a tournament practice. And then we would like to have a positive win rate in a league. And then, best case scenario, I guess, we try winning a league with it. And I think depending how far we get, we are gonna award the brew after a while up to 4 shipwrecks, I guess. So I will fill out these things. And then you can have like, I guess, see how successful some of the brews are compared to others. So I hope you enjoy some of the brews, and I think we will now switch to meet yapping about the first brew. So this is the deck we're dealing with. A quick deck check to talk about some of the synergies and the idea of the deck. The core concept is that we play 6 of these cards called Eidolons. These are multicolored spirits that you could technically just play for 4 mana as a 2/2, and they all have like a sacrifice effect. But the more important text on these are that they get back to your hand from your graveyard whenever you cast a multicolored spell. And we pair that with a bunch of discard effects. For example, Faithless Looting. So we can discard our Eidolons, play one of our couple multicolored spells, get the Eidolon back to hand, and then we can discard them again to generate card advantage. I think it's an interesting card advantage engine because it does not get hit by artifact hate. You will get hit by graveyard hate though, so if there's a lot of that going on, for example, in your metagame, your local metagame, you might want to reconsider it. But you have some ways of playing around it. But anyways, the second part of the original idea for the deck is the card called Shipwreck Sifters. I tried to make a deck with him work for a couple of months, and I think this is the first time that this felt pretty good. So Shipwreck Sifters is a 2 mana 1/2 spirit that when it enters, it draws a card and it discards a card. That is already good because, like I said, we can get back our Sandstorm Eidolons if we discard them. So this card kind of helps making the engine work. But also, whenever we discard a card that's a spirit or that has Disturb, which doesn't matter in this deck, this gets a +1/+1 counter. So this can actually grow decently fast if led unchecked, but I think it's just very nice to have kind of like a card that helps with your engine and that can come down as a 2/3 on turn 2. It kind of forces Kuldotha to use like one of their burn spells on it because it blocks all of their 2 attack creatures pretty well. If you have an Eidolon in hand, and if they ignore it, it can pretty fast grow out of their burn range. If you have an Eidolon, that is, which we play 6 of, because all these Eidolons are spirits. So that's kind of the idea of the deck, and then we combine this with a couple of multicolored spells. And as a finisher, we play this really sweet card, Rites of Initiation. This says when we play it that we can discard any number of cards at random from our hand. And creatures we control get +1/+0 until end of turn for each card discarded this way. So this is really sick. Like just a couple of random 1/1 creatures, and maybe you discarded a couple of Eidolons, like 3 Eidolons in your graveyard, you cast a multicolored spell, you get them all back, you discard them into Rites of Initiation, and all of a sudden you can attack with this huge amount of attack power, which can take people by surprise. And it's kind of addicting, because like whenever you're really behind on board, but if you just have 1 or 2 creatures, there's always a chance that you might still just win the game. If your opponent doesn't know about the card, if they don't leave up enough blockers, or if you just draw enough cards to just kill them. So really sweet card. It's an instant also, and this card is not part of the cost of the card, so if this gets countered, you don't lose your whole hand. Then we will go through all of the cards. We'll start with 4 copies of Faithless Looting. This is just a good engine card with the Eidolons. The flashback is nice to get you going if you kind of just flood out with a couple of lands. I mean, there's a reason why this card is banned in a lot of formats. We currently play 1 copy of Crash Through. This is part of the flag slots of the deck. Currently testing it. It's a 1-mana card that draws a card and gives you creatures trample. So this is really just there if we have like a huge Rites of Initiation or a huge Shipwreck Sifters. Which, by the way, look at this artwork. I think the Innistrad Ghosts art direction is amazing. I think that's one very huge advantage of the card. I really like it. And if we have like a very huge Sifters or like a huge Rites of Initiation, but our opponent just has like spawn tokens, elves, inspectors in the way, we can kind of power through that. Sadly, Crash Through is a sorcery, but it also draws a card which can be relevant for the Sneaky Snacker that we also play. But more of that later. So then we play 4 Valdaran Epicure, because we play a bunch of cards that cost 2 mana, filling out our curve with like a 1-mana creature and having the blood token as an additional mana sink felt really nice. And it's obviously we need like a critical amount of creatures to use Rites of Initiation. This also pings for 1, which can sometimes help push like the last couple of damage through, so that our rights can get into kill range. Then we play 1 of Cunning Survivor, also a very sweet card. It has the text that whenever you cycle or discard a card, Cunning Survivor gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and it can't be blocked this turn. So the combo here is that if you cast a Rites of Initiation and, for example, discard 5 cards, this Rites will give the Cunning Survivor +5/+0, but all of the discarded cards trigger the Cunning Survivor ones. So the Cunning Survivor also gets +5/+0 by itself, and it can't be blocked. So in the example of discarding 5 cards, this is suddenly an 11/3 unblockable. And that can catch people quite off guard and can theoretically lead to a lot of damage. I'm just playing 1 copy because I feel like in the current meta game, there's a lot of like snuff outs floating around and a lot of spot removal because of Glee combo. And this obviously can win games by itself, and it is really nice to break through like very locked down boards where you normally wouldn't get through, and it can catch people off guard, and it has 3 life, so it dodges Breath Weapon, for example, if your opponent decides to bring that against you. And yeah, but I feel like sometimes you just play it on turn 2, it gets snuff outed, and you didn't do any progression through your game plan. And I feel like that sometimes feels really bad. So we're just leaving it at 1 copy. Could be that, I don't know, maybe even 4 copies is the correct way. I'm also interested in trying out a version that plays Street Rave as like a free way to cycle and give this another +1/+0. But yeah, so far 1 copy. We already talked about Shipwreck Sifters. We played 4 of those. They are especially nice against certain matchups where having a big creature can be relevant. It's good against mono blue terror and fury because it can grow larger than their terrors. It will get boomeranged or deemed inferior pretty often though, just be prepared for that. And it's really nice against Brew monsters because they don't have a good way of interacting with the Sifters if you get them really big. And occasionally, I don't know, against Boggles, you can sometimes actually just block their Boggles if you manage to keep them off a couple of enchantments. The other 4 flag slots, which I'm still unsure of, are 4 copies of Spellstutter Sprite. And now you're thinking, okay, wait, isn't this like a Spirits deck? Why are we playing Spellstutter Sprite? It doesn't loot, it doesn't, like, you only play like a couple other instant speed cards, which is very true, but I think Spellstutter Sprites on a second look looks really nice for the deck. It gives the deck some much needed interaction. I think it's pretty well positioned in the meta currently, because it does counter statistically, but it dodges Duress and Tamio's safekeeping, because it's a creature, and because we target a spell on the stack and not a permanent. So I think that's the reason, also a reason why we run it. And then leaving behind a 1/1 flying body when we play Rites of Initiation is quite relevant. And because we already like to play Sneaky Snacker as a way of getting in small flying creatures for free, we already actually play another fairy. And I think that's sometimes just enough to justify using Spellstutter Sprite. I have to say, Spellstutter Sprite is a pretty new addition to the deck. The deck felt pretty nice with it, and I have some nostalgic memories of it, because actually the first like more serious deck I ever built was like a Jeskai Flicker deck with Restoration Angel in Modern, like way back ago. But I was still a pupil, so I didn't have the money to buy Snapcaster Mages. So I substituted them with Spellstutter Sprites, which is quite fun. So yeah, just happy to kind of sneak it into another like Jeskai colored deck. So yeah, I'm currently testing them out. They felt decent, and I think the deck lacked some interaction beforehand, and so yeah, I think the card is pretty well positioned currently. Also just noticed yesterday that this card actually counters every single card in some Cold Offer lists, because they only run 1 mana spells these days, so it's also like decent against those decks. Don't think I have to say much about Sneaky Snacker. The card is amazing in this deck with the amount of discard and draw synergies. It is also technically a multicolored card, which we can cast off of Seagate, technically. Don't think it ever happened to me. But that can be relevant because it would trigger the Eidolons. But mostly it's there to justify us being able to cycle through our deck so much and loot through our deck so much, and also build like at least some board presence. And as a flyer combined with Spellstutter Sprite, I also noticed that sometimes like a couple of flyers against some decks can also just finish the game pretty damn fast. So we obviously don't like Rolfing Chrysalis being around that much, so I'm still kind of figuring out how to maybe better play around that card. For example, with the one of Crash Through, being able maybe to go over it, but yeah, the card is obviously amazing. It's pretty good against Delvers from the Mono Blue. Awesome card. As our multicolored spell suit, we are playing Izzet, just a nice flexible card. Again, gives us some amount of interaction against decks that we normally wouldn't have interaction to. The 2 mana damage, for example, on a creature can actually be quite relevant because it kills the Basking Broodscale. But most of the time we just use it as another looting effect that is multicolored to draw cards off of our Eidolons getting back. Then we play 4 copies of Mana Morphos. I should stop saying that's a bad habit, I'm just noticing. My public speaking coming back. The Mana Morphos is especially nice because the mana fixing aspect of the card is actually really relevant in this deck. We play 3 colors, and sometimes we, for example, don't have a white source for thrilling discoveries, and then we can splash them with our mana. And obviously this being a kind of free multicolored spell, getting back all the Eidolons, it draws a card, which can be relevant for Sneaky Snacker to trigger the Snackers in our graveyard. It's an instant speed multicolored cards, so if your opponent has, for example, like a spell bomb and wants to exile your Eidolons or your Snackers, you can sometimes juke them out by casting a Manamorphose in response, getting back all your cards, putting Snackers into play. And this is kind of a way of playing around some of the graveyard hate you will probably face in game 2 and 3, or sometimes even in the main deck. Like, people go crazy with like Bayuka Box and Spell Bombs. Then the reason why we are splashing white is this card, Thrilling Discovery. It's a 2-mana card that gains you 2 life, then you may discard 2 cards, so you can actually just play this to gain 2 life. And then you may discard 2 cards. If you do, you will draw 3 cards. The way this works is that because it's a multicolored spell, and because the Sandstorm Eidolons trigger on cast, you will get the Sandstorm Eidolons back to your hand before the spell resolves. So if you have 2 Eidolons in your graveyard, and you cast this card essentially reads 2 mana, gain 2 life, draw 3 cards. And this is just everything this deck ever wants. It's also noticeable that this card discards before you draw the cards, so you can just discard a Sneaky Snacker in it and then immediately get it into play. I think there's like a Boros Bully list around that kind of uses this interaction, and that's where I got the like initial idea with the Thrilling Discoveries from. So very powerful card. It's the reason why we splash white. There is probably an argument to say that you just play Izzet colors and ignore white to have like a better mana base. But so far I think the card is worth it. I think the 2 life are pretty relevant against mono red. They are relevant against Terror because Terror mostly likes to attack you 4 times with a 5/5. And gaining 2 additional life is obviously really nice, because then they have to attack 5 times. So I think it's a pretty nice card. And it also obviously builds card advantage. It gets to all rights of initiation. It's pretty damn fast. It gets the Eidolons back. It does kind of everything your deck wants to do. Then we play this sick border postcards, which are pretty old, so if you don't know them, it's a cycle of 5 artifact cards that says you can pay 1 colorless and return a basic land that you control back to your hand to cast this instead of casting it for 3 mana. And it comes into play tapped, and this one produces white and blue mana. So this is basically just a tap land that triggers our Eidolons. So a nice way of increasing our multicolored card counts without sacrificing any deck slots for cards that aren't that good. And also I noticed it's pretty nice that you can cast this, get back your Eidolons, and because you return a mountain or like an island to your hand, you actually don't lose a card from your hand in this exchange. So if you have a Rites of Initiations in your hand, you can kind of play this card, and because you get a card back, you don't lose any cards from your hand, which would result in less cards that you can discard here. So that can be nice, but it's mostly there to trigger the Eidolons. Then about the Eidolons we already talked. We are playing 2 of the red Eidolons and 4 of the white Eidolons. The white Eidolon has, for 1 white, you can sacrifice it to prevent the next 3 damage that would be dealt to any target. This is mostly there to protect ourselves and I guess occasionally our creatures from burn spells. For example, if you manage to stabilize against mono red early game, and you probably know the feeling, you're like stabilized, but you're kind of down to 3 life. And so every bolt, top deck, or every piece of damage will just kill you, and it's a very annoying feeling. So I figured that so far the Aurora Eidolon was the most relevant one, because you can then, if you stabilize the board, just play it and have like a little bit of protection against random burn spells from the top, so they at least need like 2 burn spells to kill you. The red one also felt pretty impactful more often than I thought. This one has, for 1 mana, you can sacrifice it to prevent target creature from blocking this turn. And I always forget that this is an option, but sometimes your opponent just leaves like 1 or 2 blockers, and actually being able to remove one for 5 mana, which is obviously terrible, but if it's still last blocker they have and that prevents you from killing them, then this is actually pretty damn relevant. So yeah, we do not play the blue one currently because I never used it in my testing, so just on 2 red ones and 4 white ones currently. For the mana base, we play 4 sea gates, not because we run any gate synergies, but because of the effect of picking our secondary color. We will mostly pick white, because if you look at our deck, all of our multicolored spells are red and another color. At least all the ones that we would like to cast. So Izzet Charm and Fling Discoveries are red and a blue and red and a white respectively, and Mana Morphos is a red. So if we have 1 sea gate on white or 1 border post and a mountain, we can actually play every card in our deck, which is amazing in a deck that is 3 colored. So that's kind of why we run this many mountains and 4 sea gates and not a cliff gate or citadel gate or anything. And then we run 2 basic islands to have like an untapped blue source, which can come in handy. So yeah, that's kind of the mana base. As you notice, we play 14 lands and 4 border posts, so 18 lands in total, which is really greedy, I have to admit. So far it worked, but if you want to copy this deck and you notice that you really don't like the mulligans, you obviously can make more room for lands, maybe go up to 19 or 20 lands. I just don't like flooding out when I'm trying to combo off. So that's kind of the reason for this greedy mana base. But yeah, it's, I don't know, could be that it's very bad. So if someone has like the probabilities for me, or like points out like that what would be a good land, feel free. I already considered the bounce land, there's the 3-colored fetch land. I think one idea that's pretty sweet is running Conduit Pylon. But yeah, I feel like that's kind of in general with this deck. I feel like there's a lot of cards that could be good in this deck, and that's kind of what makes this interesting. So this is just the current version. Currently I'm running the Fairy package with the 4 spell status sprites and the 1 crash through. But there's so many options to go with this deck, and that's kind of why I'm setting myself this challenge of trying to make this deck decently viable and trying out how far I can push it. Speaking of pushing it, one thing I have not pushed is the sideboard, so just ignore that for now. I'm really trying to figure out what I would like to have in my sideboard. One noticeable card that you probably want are Pyroblasts. I just don't have them on Magic Online currently, they're pretty expensive. But I will probably get them soon, because I think you really want them against mono blue decks, and I have them in paper and they felt pretty good there. One card that definitely performed is the 4 copies of Raven Charm, I have to say. It's good against so many different decks, and it's so flexible. It gives you a lot of good matchup against more niche decks, like it can mess with Dredge, having like the ability to get 4 instant speed graveyard removals that they, compared to the artifacts, they will not see coming, and that they can't Ancient Grudge and can't Siege Smash is really nice. It's primarily there for Junt Brutescale. It can kill their Brutescale, it can kill the makeshift munitions and the Ripping Chrysalis. God, it's getting hard to talk. You will, by the way, fun fact, it's the second time I have recorded this, because on the first time I just recorded a black screen. This is fine. So yeah, the Raven Charms felt great. I surprisingly played a lot against Boggles, and having the ability to destroy their enchantments as on instant speed is really nice. So yeah, also this should definitely be breath weapons. I just don't have them currently because I'm just testing, but I have them in paper and it's definitely better. I don't know if I still want to run 4 of these. In the original version, I was running 4 Cunning Survivors, and with 4 Cunning Survivors, 4 Shipwreck Sifters, and 4 Sneaky Snackers, I had a lot of cards that just didn't care about getting 2 damage, so you can be pretty aggressive and still run all of these creatures and run all of these sweepers. And sometimes you could just clear the board and then kill them. But currently I'm just running 1 Cunning Survivors and like Sprites and Epicures, so I don't know if 4 is correct, but I have them. Same thing which I'm not sure about is the Shattering Blows. In theory, these sound really nice against Affinity. It's a multicolored spell, so you get back your Eidolons, it's easy to cast in this deck. It exiles an artifact of them. But I feel like Affinity just doesn't care if we exile the artifact. You probably will have a round where you exile their bridge and they get mana screwed and can't do anything, sure. But I haven't had that yet, I have to be honest. I think most of the time this wasn't as impactful as I would like it to be. So I'm thinking about if we should maybe treat this deck more as like a combo deck and just run cards in the sideboard that either completely shut down strategies that we otherwise couldn't win against, like Boggles, or like Dredge without graveyard interaction. And if in matchups like Affinity, where we technically can't just win with our main game plan, we maybe just want to focus on protecting our main game plan instead of trying to mess with their game plan and trying to interact with them, because you will lose the long game against Affinity. Even though we play a lot of flyers, which normally Affinity is weak to, so far they just went over me. And so far the reason mostly for Shattering Blow is that it removes their Kenku Artificer bridge, which I think is pretty relevant. And I don't think you need it in a lot of other matchups. There's probably some random matchups, but for example against the Brute Scale, the Giant Brute Scale lists that play the bridges, I'm not even sure if I would board the Shattering Blows, to be honest, because I think I would much rather focus on trying to kill them instead of like messing with the lands and hoping that like 1 Shattering Blow is mana screen them and so on and so on. So yeah, sideboard definitely up to debate. You definitely want Pyroblast against mono blue because it protects your combo and it's good interaction. And apart from that, there's a lot of cards that I will probably try out, like Flaring Pain, and maybe like there's like this Dredge 2 card that whenever it comes back to your hand, you gain 2 life, which I would love to try out as a way of gaining life against mono red. But in general, the idea is that I will probably change around the numbers in the deck quite often to try out which version feels the best, because to be honest, the deck is pretty new. I haven't seen a lot of people trying something like this. But there was lately the Kablinski who tried a Grixis Eidolon list. So there was, for a brief moment, there was a lot of discussion about Eidolons, which gave a lot of useful tips, like the border post, like the rites of initiation. So I'm actually first time at a version that I'm decently happy with. And I would love to try to see how much I can like push it and how strong this deck could become if you test out a lot of different things. So that's why I'm setting the challenge. You will either see me at the end of it win a Pauper League in a glorious way and demonstrate that this deck has some potential, or the much more reasonable variant is that we will not get there and this deck isn't actually that good and it's way too easily interactable and so on. But yeah, that's the deck. I think it's pretty sweet. I had a couple of people on Magic Online ask me about the deck list, and so I don't know, maybe someone finds this on YouTube and has a blast playing it. I did play an earlier version of this at a local tournament. I went 2-3, so I did not place very highly, but most of the matches ended up in 2-1, which was at least a little bit of like hope going there. But yeah, maybe this version will actually be the one that carries us through. So stay tuned. I will probably post some videos about me playing this deck. And like I said in the beginning, first goal, getting 3 wins in a row in tournament practice. Should be possible, hopefully.